Hello. My name is Luna. I'm 68 years old. And I've lived in Boulder, Colorado nearly all my life. I've weathered more winters than I can count. Ran a coffee shop on Pearl Street for over 3 decades. And raised my son, Jason, mostly on my own after my husband passed away far too young. I never traveled far. Never indulged in much luxury. I was the kind of woman who wore sensible shoes, bought things on sale, and knew how to stretch a dollar until it squeaked. But on that particular Thursday morning, something felt different. There I was, standing in front of a mirror at one of those fancy boutiques in downtown Denver. I had driven almost 2 hours just to be there, trying on a deep burgundy dress that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months. The fabric hugged places I'd spent years hiding under oversized sweaters and jeans. I barely recognized myself. "You look beautiful in that color," the young assistant said, gently adjusting the folds. "It makes your eyes pop." I nodded politely, not sure how to take a compliment anymore. But somewhere inside, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I still had it in me to glow. After all, this wasn't just any day. I was buying this dress for my son's wedding. In 2 weeks, Jason would marry Emily Prescott, a lovely, polished young woman from a well-off family in Austin, Texas. Jason and I, well, let's just say our relationship has been complicated. Ever since college, he's built a life that feels like it exists on a different planet, one with catered dinners, country club brunches, and conversations about stocks I can't pronounce. I'm proud of him. Of course I am. But I'd be lying if I said the distance between us didn't hurt. Still, I wanted to show up that day with my head high. I wanted to look like someone who belonged, not to impress anyone, but to prove something to myself that I wasn't invisible, that I mattered. I had paid for most of the wedding, though Jason didn't know. It was something we'd arranged quietly through a wedding agency. They thought Emily's parents were footing the bill. That was fine by me. Jason's pride wouldn't let him accept help from his small-town mom, as he once called me. I didn't mind staying in the background, as long as I could witness my only child step into his new life. So I bought the dress. And as I stepped out of that boutique, back in Hunt, heels clicking on the sidewalk like punctuation, I told myself this would be a good thing. That it didn't matter how distant Jason had become, or how invisible I often felt in his world. I told myself, "You're his mother. Of course you'll be there." But sometimes, the heart believes things it desperately wants to be true. The morning of the wedding was clear and golden. The kind of late September day that made Boulder feel like heaven pressed up against the Rockies. I woke up before the sun, took a long shower, curled my still thick silver hair, and put on the burgundy dress I had bought in Denver. A pair of low heels, a touch of rose lipstick, and the envelope with the honeymoon gift carefully placed in my clutch completed the look. I wanted to be early. I didn't want to rush. I didn't want to miss a second. The Aspen Lodge was breathtaking. It sat up on a ridge, surrounded by golden aspens and whispering pines. Fancy cars lined the parking lot, shiny Teslas, black Escalades, even a Rolls-Royce. My old Subaru looked like a misplaced memory among them. Still, I held my head high. Inside the lobby, there was laughter, soft jazz, the scent of eucalyptus and white roses. Guests mingled in perfectly tailored suits and pastel gowns. I scanned the room, searching for someone familiar. Most faces were strangers. And then Grandma Chloe came rushing toward me in a light blue bridesmaid dress. At 23, she looked just like Jason had at her age, same smile. Zama sparkle. She hugged me tight. You look amazing. I was so afraid you might not come. Of course, I came. I smiled. How could I miss my son's wedding? She was about to introduce me to some of the bridal party when Jason appeared. My son. Dashing in his tux. Sharp haircut. But his jaw was tight. His smile thin. Mom. He said. Flat and clipped. As if he wasn't sure I was real. What? What are you doing here? My heart stumbled. I came to your wedding. Of course I did. He glanced around quickly. Come with me. Please. He took me by the elbow and led me down a quiet hallway near the reception hall. His grip was firm. Not violent, but firm enough to make his intentions clear. Mom. He began. Looking anywhere but at me? I thought we'd talked about this. You're not on the guest list. I stared at him. Confused. We didn't talk. We haven't spoken in weeks. Jason. What do you mean I'm not on the list? I'm your mother. He ran a hand through his hair. Exasperated. This is an elite event. Mom. Emily's parents are here. And they're guests. I just don't think you'd feel comfortable. He didn't say the word, but I heard it anyway. Embarrassing. You're ashamed of me. I whispered. Not a question, just truth. No. I just look. Emily really wanted everything to be perfect. And I didn't want to cause tension. I looked at him. Steady now. So you excluded your mother. The one who paid for your perfect day. He flinched. They don't know that. Please. Just go. We'll have dinner later. Okay, I took a breath. Lifted my chin. Whatever you say. Jason. Congratulations. And I walked out, heels clicking against polished wood. The envelope still untouched in my hand. The drive back to Boulder felt like floating through a fog I couldn't shake. The sun still shone. Traffic lights blinked as usual. And the world moved forward utterly indifferent to the fact that my heart had just been shattered in a hotel hallway. I pulled into my driveway. The white picket fence framing my little one-story home just as it had for decades. I sat in the car for a long moment, clutching the steering wheel like it might explain something to me. How had we ended up here, Jason and I? At what point had I become a problem he needed to solve? When I finally stepped into the house, the silence felt heavier than usual. The photos on the mantel greeted me like ghost Jason as a toddler grinning in a Superman costume. Jason at high school graduation. Jason with his father. Daniel. On that beach trip to Monterey when he was 8. Daniel would have known what to do. He was calm. The kind of man who could look at a mess and say, "All right, let's clean it up." But Daniel had been gone for 20 years. Taken by a heart attack at 49. Leaving me with a teenager and a coffee shop and a mortgage I wasn't sure I could handle. But I did. I handled it all. I built that coffee shop from a corner booth and a second-hand espresso machine into one of the most beloved places in downtown Boulder. I sent Jason to college without a cent of student debt. I helped him with his first apartment deposit. Paid legal fees during his messy divorce. Covered Chloe's private school when he couldn't swing it. I never asked for anything back. I never wanted praise. Just a seat at the table. I walked into the kitchen. Placed the untouched wedding envelope on the counter. My fingers brushed against the edge. Feeling its weight, $10. Ling. Meant as a honeymoon gift. Meant as a symbol of love and pride. Now it just felt foolish. I made tea. Though I didn't drink it. I stood by the window, staring out at my maple tree turning gold. Wondering if it even remembered the child who once climbed it 1,000 times. I wanted to cry. But the tears wouldn't come. What did that say about me that the well had dried, or that I was simply too tired to mourn a son who had already let go? You raised them with bedtime stories and scraped knees and peanut butter sandwiches. You build your life around them. And then one day they build a life that no longer includes you. Maybe that's how it's supposed to go. But somehow, deep in my bones, I knew this wasn't right. It wasn't just growing apart. It was rejection. Deliberate. Cold. Final. And in that silence, as the tea went cold on the counter, something inside me quietly, firmly, snapped. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, the envelope still untouched beside me, as if it had something left to say. The minutes turned into hours while my mind circled the same thought over and over. He didn't forget to invite me. He chose not to. At 2:17 a.m., I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened my laptop. I pulled up my email there. It was the full expense breakdown from Brightleaf Events. The floral arrangements, the venue, the live jazz band, the champagne fountain, the 5-tier wedding cake, and the honeymoon in Italy. All booked under my name. Paid from my account. 76. 840. And every dollar signed in silence. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then picked up the phone. Coastal Western Bank. 24-hour service. This is Dana. How may I assist you? My name is Luna Hartley. I said. My voice was calm, almost detached. I need to cancel all pending wedding-related payments scheduled from my account, ending in 7,729. There was a pause. Just a moment. Mom, yes? I see several transactions marked for authorization starting at 10 a.m. this morning. I want them stopped. Immediately. And I'd like the funds redirected into a new trust. Of course. And may I ask the purpose of the trust? Yes. I said, glancing at a photo of Chloe on the bookshelf, grinning in her cap and gown. It's for my granddaughter. Her education? Her future. I gave the instructions slowly, clearly. Dana's voice never wavered. Though I imagined she was sitting a little straighter in her chair. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was simply done. The next call was harder. Carrie, the planner from Brightleaf Events, answered on the third ring. Luna, is everything okay? The ceremony is today. I'm canceling all services. I said, the payments are being stopped. Please notify all vendors. There was stunned silence. Then nervous laughter. Wait, what? I'm not joking. Carrie, the groom asked me to leave the wedding yesterday. Site I didn't belong. Oh my God. She whispered. Let Jason and Emily know they'll need another sponsor. I said, then paused. Tell them the truth if they ask. Our lie. I really don't care anymore. I hung up. It was strange how light I felt afterward. For years, I'd let Jason hold the strings to our relationship, but this time, I had cut the wire. Not to hurt him. To save myself. I had spent decades giving love with no conditions. No recognition. But love should never require invisibility. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of anything. Maybe it was the beginning of me. 2 days after the canceled wedding, I received a knock on the door, not a call. Not a text. An actual knock. Like people used to do when they meant something. It was Chloe. Her cheeks were blotchy. Mascara smudged under her eyes. Still in the same bridesmaid dress. Now wrinkled and stained with tears. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with those wide hazel eyes that carried the same kind of ache I used to see in her father's face when he was small and couldn't say what hurt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I opened the door. And without hesitation, she collapsed into my arms. We sat on the old couch, the afternoon sun pooling across the floor. She told me everything about the confusion when vendors started packing up, the whispers that spread like wildfire through the guests. Jason tried to cover it up, blaming technical issues. But someone eventually told the truth. She said Emily was humiliated, her parents furious. The wedding dinner turned into an argument, champagne glasses left untouched. "But I didn't come to talk about them," she said, reaching into her bag. "I came to talk about you." She pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper lined, smudged, written in her loopy handwriting. She handed it to me and looked away. "I wrote it before the wedding," she said. "Before everything." I unfolded it slowly. "Dear Grandma, I don't say it enough, but I see you. I see how much you've given, even when no one thanked you. I see how you shrink yourself in rooms that don't deserve you. I see how you love loudly in silence. When I was little, you packed my lunch every day with little notes that said things like, 'You shine bright,' or 'Be proud of your kind heart.' I still have some of them in a box under my bed. And now I'm about to graduate college because of you. I'm here because of you. I don't know what's going on between you and Dad. I don't understand the distance, the walls. But I do know this. I will never be ashamed of you. You are the strongest person I know. You once told me that love means showing up even when no one claps for you. So, here I am. Clapping. Loud. Forever. Love. Chloe." By the time I looked up, my eyes were wet. Chloe was crying too. "I wanted you there more than anyone," she whispered. I didn't know he'd do that." I reached over, touched her cheek. "You're here now," I said. "That's enough." And in that moment, something shifted. Not the past, not the pain, but something else. The feeling that maybe I wasn't entirely alone in the world. That maybe love, real love, had finally found its way back. 3 days after Chloe's visit, I received a formal envelope in the mail. Heavy paper. Gold trim. My name embossed in cursive across the front. No return address. But I didn't need one. I knew who it was from. Inside was a handwritten note from Jason. Just 3 short lines. "Mom, I didn't know about the payments. I'm sorry. Please cash this." Jason tucked behind it was a check for $76.840. The full amount I had paid for the wedding. I stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling slightly. My name was written in his familiar, sharp scrawl. The ink still fresh. The amount so precise. So cold. And for a moment, I almost laughed. As if money could erase what had happened. As if a piece of paper could replace a mother's place at her son's wedding. I folded the check in half and placed it gently inside my old recipe box, the one Daniel had carved our initials into back in 1982. That box held more than flower-covered cards and cookie secrets. It held memories, firsts, failures, forgiveness. I figured the check could rest there too. As part of the story, later that afternoon, I drove to the cafe. It was a place I hadn't visited in months, not since I'd handed the keys to a young couple full of ambition and oat milk ideas. But I needed to be there again. I needed the smell of roasted beans, the squeak of the old stool by the corner window, the clatter of a community built one cup at a time. To my surprise, It looked just as I remembered. Even better. A chalkboard sign out front read, "Welcome home. Luna. The seat by the window still yours." I stepped inside, and the staff greeted me like a local legend. I was, in some ways, not because I brewed the best coffee, but because I had built a place where people felt seen, where they came to celebrate promotions, cry through breakups, write novels, meet future spouses. And maybe it was time I remembered that part of myself. I ordered my usual medium roast, splash of cream, cinnamon on top, and sat by the window, notebook in hand. The afternoon sun poured in like honey, warming my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt still, grounded, whole. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't check my phone for messages from Jason. I didn't replay the moment he told me I wasn't invited. Instead, I began making plans. Not for revenge, not for reconciliation, but for something I hadn't truly considered in years, a life of my own. Not built around others, not waiting on love that refused to return, but a life designed with care, with joy, with unapologetic courage, because healing doesn't always look like a hug and a perfect ending. Sometimes, it looks like not cashing the check. That following week, something shifted in me quietly at first, like the first warm breeze before spring. I stopped waiting for an apology that might never come. I stopped checking my phone. I even stopped rereading Chloe's letter. Not because it meant any less, but because I had memorized every word of it. Instead, I turned inward towards something I hadn't done in a long time. I started asking myself what I wanted. It started small. I signed up for a pottery class at the Boulder Arts Center Tuesday nights. 3 hours. No experience needed. My hands, which had once only known bills and coffee mugs and the routine of motherhood, started shaping wet clay into something uncertain and beautiful. I also pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years. On the first page, I wrote one sentence: "This chapter is mine." Every morning, I wrote a paragraph or two. Not about Jason, not about the hurt, but about moments that sparked joy, the way the neighbor's golden retriever wagged her whole body when I walked by, the smell of cinnamon rolls from the bakery on 19th Street, the laughter of college kids outside my window at dusk. Life, in its tiny acts of offering. And then, one day, I did something bold. I booked a solo trip to Taos, New Mexico. Just me. 3 nights. A small adobe casita. A place I'd always wanted to visit but never found time for. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I didn't explain. I just went. I hiked through red canyons and listened to the wind whistle secrets through the brush. I ate enchiladas so spicy they brought tears to my eyes. And I laughed alone. At my table with no one to impress. I bought a silver cuff from a local artisan and wore it like armor. But it was one morning, on the edge of a mesa, wrapped in a wool shawl and sipping black coffee from a tin cup, that it truly hit me. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like someone's mother, or someone's employee, or someone's background. I felt like me. Not defined by roles. Not reduced to a line on a guest list. Just Luna. Still standing. Still soft. Still strong. When I returned home, I framed a photo I had taken in Taos, just the wide open desert under a pale sky, and hung it over the fireplace. Not because it was art, but because it was proof. Proof that pain doesn't have to be your final address. Proof that even when people forget your worth, you don't have to. And that sometimes, the most radical act of healing Is giving something beautiful back to yourself? Fall settled over Boulder like an old friend, golden leaves skipping across sidewalks. The air crisp and kind. I'd returned from Taos feeling lighter, more present, more myself. But the world didn't pause to notice. Bills still came. Grocery lists still needed writing. And family? Well, family stayed complicated. It had been over a month since I'd heard from Jason. Chloe texted often photos of her dorm life. A silly selfie wearing the silver cuff I gave her. Updates on her creative writing class. But from my son's silence, then one Friday afternoon, I opened the mailbox to find a small ivory envelope tucked among catalogs and credit card offers. My name was printed in careful block letters. No return address. I opened it slowly. Heart already bracing. Inside was a simple card. Emily and Jason proudly announced the birth of their daughter, Ella Grace. Born the 12th of October. 6 lub 8 os. She is perfect. No not. No apology. No mention of the wedding. Just a clean, beautiful announcement as if nothing had ever happened. I sat down on the front steps, the card still in my hand. For a long while, I watched the wind tease leaves across the driveway. My granddaughter had been born. My flesh and blood. A new beginning I hadn't been invited to witness. And yet, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. What I felt, more than anything, was grief. Not the sharp kind that steals your breath, but the dull, aching sort that hums in your bones. Grief for all the moments I would miss. Grief for a family that no longer felt like mine. Grief for how invisible love can become when pride builds the walls. I thought about sending a gift, a blanket, a handwritten letter. Something. Anything. But I stopped myself. Because the truth was, love shouldn't need to beg for space. And then I did something unexpected. I took out a blank piece of stationery and wrote a card not to Jason. Not to Emily, but to Ella Grace. Dear Ella, you don't know me yet. And maybe you never will. But I was there the moment your daddy took his first steps. I was there for every nightmare. Every science fair. Every scraped knee. I was there when he got his driver's license. When he cried after his first heartbreak. When he left for college with trembling hands. I held him when he was fragile. I cheered when he was brave. I believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. And I would have done the same for you. If the day ever comes that you wonder where I was, I hope you know this: I was here. Loving you quietly. From afar. Always. Luna, I sealed it. Not with the intent to send it, but to remember that love, real love, doesn't vanish, even when it has nowhere to go. The first real snow came in late November. Thick, silent, and soft, coating the sidewalks like powdered sugar. Muffling the sounds of a world too busy to notice heartbreak. I stood by the window in my small cottage, watching the snow fall. When I realized something strange, I didn't feel bitter anymore. Not toward Jason. Not toward Emily. Not even toward the version of myself who had stayed quiet too long. The grief had softened, not disappeared, but settled in like an old coat. Familiar. Bearable. Maybe even useful. That morning, I opened the door to the spare room once filled with Jason's childhood posters and dusty memories and saw it with fresh eyes. Not as a monument to what was lost, but as space waiting for something new. So I cleared it out, boxed the old trophies, folded the high school jerseys, stored the framed certificates in the attic. And then I painted the walls a shade called Wild Iris, a soft, defiant purple that whispered, "This is mine now." I filled it with books I'd been meaning to read. A vintage record player I found at a thrift store. A desk with a wide surface, just begging for words. On the wall, I hung a photo of Taos of the Mesa under that endless blue sky. It wasn't just a room. It was a declaration. Of joy. Of reclamation. Of life after heartbreak. And then I started writing again. Not journal entries this time, but real pages. A story about a woman in her 60s who loses everything and somehow finds herself. It wasn't polished. It wasn't profound. But it was honest. And it was mine. One evening, as I sipped tea in that room, wrapped in a wool shawl and listening to Billie Holiday spin softly in the background, I looked around and smiled. This was the life I'd postponed for others. The art I never made because dinner needed cooking. The silence I never sought because someone always needed noise. The dreams I deferred for weddings I wasn't invited to. Grandchildren I hadn't held. And sons who had forgotten the texture of my love. But not anymore. This room was proof. That healing didn't have to be loud. That joy could come in soft hues and slow mornings. That even in a world that had tried to shrink me, I could choose to expand. A few days later, Chloe visited. She stepped into the room, wide-eyed, running her fingers along the spine of my manuscript. "You made this," she asked. "I did," I said, smiling. She walked to the window, snowflakes dancing outside, and whispered, "You're kind of amazing." "Grandma," I laughed, not politely, not quietly, but from the gut, the kind of laugh that only comes when you've reclaimed yourself. Because in that room, in that moment, I wasn't anyone's afterthought. I was the author of my own second act. Christmas came quietly that year. No flurry of invitations. No long drive to someone else's house. No eager hands pulling ribbon from gifts. Just me. A tiny spruce tree from the corner market. And a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and hope. I set the table for one, not because I was lonely, but because I had something to celebrate. Myself. The woman who had survived heartbreak and silence. The woman who chose to grow instead of harden. The woman who, for the first time in decades, had stopped waiting to be chosen and chose herself. Dinner was simple roasted vegetables, a slice of pecan pie, and a small glass of red wine. But it tasted rich, earned, sacred. Somehow, afterward, I lit a candle in the window, not as a beacon for someone to return, but as a symbol that this house, this heart was no longer dimmed by who hadn't come. And then, just as I settled in with a book, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Chloe standing there. Cheeks pink from the cold. Arms cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in white fleece. "I brought someone who wanted to meet you," she whispered. And there she was. Ella Grace. My granddaughter. Tiny. Blinking. Making soft sounds that felt like music. Chloe stepped in and gently placed her in my arms. "Jason doesn't know I'm here," she said, voice trembling. But I couldn't let another day pass without this. I held Ella close, breathing in the newness of her. Her warmth seeped into me like sunlight through stained glass. I wrote her name in the card. I said softly, even before I saw her, I knew I would love her. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "She has your eyes," she said. We sat together for hours, talking, laughing, letting silence fall when it needed to. No blame. No agenda. Just presence. Just women. Generations apart. Bridging something broken with nothing more than love and courage. When it was time to go, Chloe turned at the door. He'll come around, she said. I don't know when, but he will. And when he does, I hope you haven't closed the door. I looked at her, then at Ella, then back at the table. Still set for one? I haven't closed anything. I said, I've just learned not to leave it open to the wind. She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. After they left, I sat back down. The house was quiet again. But this time, it felt full. Full of memory. Full of meaning. Full of me. So if you're listening to this story and wondering what to do with your own broken pieces, set the table anyway. Light the candle. Write the story. Because healing isn't a moment, it's 1,000 quiet choices. And sometimes, it all begins with loving yourself enough to stay seated at a table set for one.